Picture this: the most powerful man in England, kneeling in the dirt with his hands bound behind his back. The executioner's axe gleams in the morning sun. This isn't some common criminal. This is Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, once the king's best friend. And in just moments, his blood will stain the altar of his own cathedral. How did it come to this? How does a friendship between two of the most powerful men in medieval Europe end in murder? You're standing in 12th century England, where the line between church and state is drawn in blood. The year is 1170, and the kingdom stretches from the Scottish borders down to the sun-baked lands of southern France. This is the age of an empire, ruled by Henry II, a man who controls more land than the King of France himself. But here's the thing about medieval England. Power isn't just about armies and castles. It's about souls. The Catholic Church owns about a third of all the land, runs the schools, and decides who goes to heaven or hell. And at the heart of this religious empire sits Canterbury Cathedral, where the Archbishop holds court like a king. The streets of London are narrow and muddy, filled with merchants hawking their goods and pilgrims heading to pray. Stone churches tower over wooden houses, their bells marking the rhythm of daily life. Everyone knows their place. Peasants bow to nobles, nobles bow to the king. But there's one man who thinks he only needs to bow to God. And that's where our story really begins. Meet Henry II. Imagine a man who never sits still, never stops talking, and never, ever backs down from a fight. He's got flaming red hair, hands that are always moving, and a temper that can explode without warning. Henry inherited his throne when he was just 21. And by age 30, he's built the largest empire in Europe since Charlemagne. But Henry has a problem. The church courts are basically running a parallel justice system, and he can't touch them. A priest commits murder? Church court. A monk steals money? Church court. It's driving him absolutely crazy because he can't control it. So Henry comes up with what he thinks is a brilliant plan. He's going to promote his best friend, Thomas Becket, to become Archbishop of Canterbury. Thomas has been his chancellor for 7 years. They hunt together. They party together. They even share the same bed when they're traveling. Thomas knows how Henry thinks, and Henry trusts him completely. Here's what the chronicles tell us. According to the contemporary writer Herbert of Bosham, Henry once said to Thomas, "You and I together could do anything." The royal records show that between 1155 and 1162, Thomas Becket was involved in virtually every major decision of Henry's reign. This wasn't just friendship. This was a political partnership that shaped an entire kingdom. December 1161. The old archbishop dies, and Henry sees his chance. He calls Thomas into his private chambers and basically says, "Congratulations, you're the new Archbishop of Canterbury." But Thomas does something that shocks everyone, including Henry. He looks his best friend in the eye and says, "If you make me Archbishop, I will no longer be your friend. I will serve God, not you." Henry laughs it off. He thinks Thomas is just being dramatic. After all, this is the same guy who once spent the equivalent of $1 million in today's money on a single diplomatic mission just to impress people. Surely he'll play along with Henry's plan, right? Wrong. The moment Thomas becomes Archbishop in June 1162, everything changes. He starts wearing rough monk's robes instead of silk. He gives away his fancy possessions to the poor. He begins protecting church privileges that Henry wants to destroy. Most shocking of all, he starts saying no to the king. By 1163, they're having screaming matches in public. The contemporary chronicler William of Canterbury recorded that during one argument, Henry shouted, "I raised you from nothing." And Thomas shot back, "God raised me to this position, not you." Here are the facts. Medieval church records show that in the 7 years before becoming archbishop, Thomas Becket never once ruled against Henry's interests. But in his first year as archbishop, he opposed the king on church taxation, clerical courts, and the appointment of bishops. The transformation was complete and immediate. Things get ugly fast. Henry decides if Thomas won't cooperate, he'll force him to. In January 1164, he drags Thomas to Clarendon Palace and basically puts a sword to his throat. "Sign these constitutions," Henry demands, "or else." The constitutions of Clarendon are Henry's master plan to control the church. They say that church courts can't punish clergy without the king's permission, that bishops can't leave the country without royal approval, and that church lands belong to the crown. It's everything Thomas has been fighting against. For a moment, it looks like Thomas might cave. The other bishops are begging him to sign, saying it's better to live and fight another day. Thomas takes the quill, hesitates, and then puts it down. "I cannot and will not sign," he says. "My conscience before God forbids it." Henry is so furious that witnesses later said his eyes looked like they were on fire. He starts legal proceedings against Thomas for treason, demanding he pay back every penny the royal treasury spent during his time as chancellor. We're talking about astronomical sums, enough to bankrupt even the church. Thomas realizes he's in mortal danger. In October 1164, he disguises himself as a monk and flees across the English Channel to France. King Louis of France, who's always happy to annoy Henry, gives Thomas sanctuary. Archaeological evidence from recent excavations at Clarendon Palace reveals burn marks in the Great Hall, consistent with accounts of Henry's explosive rage during this period. The financial records show Henry demanded 44,000 marks from Thomas, equivalent to about $150 million today. No individual could pay such a sum, which proves this was meant to destroy Thomas financially. For 6 long years, Thomas lives in exile while Henry rules England with an iron fist. But by 1170, both men are getting tired of the fight. The Pope is threatening to place all of England under interdict, basically spiritual warfare that would shut down every church in the kingdom. Henry's own nobles are getting nervous about defying the church so openly, so they meet in France and hammer out what looks like a peace deal. Thomas can come home, Henry will restore church privileges, and they'll try to be friends again. It seems too good to be true. And it is. Thomas returns to England in December 1170 and immediately starts excommunicating bishops who supported Henry during the exile. It's like he's declaring war all over again. When Henry hears about this, he completely loses it. Picture the scene. Henry's holding court at Ber-le-Roi Castle in Normandy when the news arrives. According to eyewitness accounts, he starts screaming and throwing furniture. Then he shouts the words that will haunt him forever. "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" 4 knights hear these words. Reginald Fitz-Urse, Hugh de Morville, William de Tracy, and Richard le Breton. They look at each other, grab their swords, and ride hard for the coast. They're going to England to solve Henry's Thomas problem permanently. They arrive at Canterbury Cathedral on December 29, 1170, just as evening prayers are beginning. The cathedral is packed with monks and pilgrims, hundreds of people seeking God's blessing. Thomas is at the altar when the 4 knights burst through the doors, fully armed. "Where is Thomas Becket, traitor to the king?" Fitz-Urse shouts. Thomas could have run. There were back passages, places to hide. Instead, he steps forward and says, "Here I am. I am Thomas, Archbishop of Canterbury, but no traitor." What happens next is brutal and swift. The knights try to drag Thomas outside, but he grabs onto a pillar and won't let go. So they decide to finish it right there, in front of the altar, with hundreds of witnesses watching in horror. Fitz-Urse swings first, his sword slicing across Thomas's scalp. Tracy's blade cuts deeper. Morville and Le Breton finish the job. According to Edward Grimm, a monk who was there, the final blow was so violent it shattered Thomas's skull and broke the sword on the cathedral floor. The moment Thomas dies, everything changes. The monks start collecting his blood in cups, claiming it has miraculous healing powers. Within hours, people are reporting miracles. A blind woman touches Thomas's blood-stained robes and can suddenly see. A crippled man walks. Word spreads like wildfire. Henry, meanwhile, is facing the biggest crisis of his reign. When news of the murder reaches him, he reportedly faints and doesn't speak for 3 days. He knows he's in deep trouble. You don't murder an archbishop and expect to get away with it, even if you're the King of England. The Pope is furious. All of Europe is horrified. Henry's own subjects start turning against him. The man who once controlled the largest empire in Europe now can't even control his own kingdom. So Henry does something unprecedented for a medieval king. He admits he was wrong. In 1174, he walks barefoot to Canterbury Cathedral, wearing rough sackcloth. When he reaches Thomas's tomb, he lies face down on the stone floor while monks whip his bare back. The most powerful man in Europe, beaten like a common criminal, all because of his former friend. But here's the thing about Thomas's death. It backfires spectacularly on Henry. Instead of solving the church problem, it makes Thomas a martyr. Just 3 years later, Pope Alexander III declares Thomas a saint. Canterbury becomes one of the most important pilgrimage sites in all of Europe. People travel from across the continent to pray at the spot where Thomas died. The financial records show that Canterbury Cathedral received donations worth millions in today's currency within the first year after Thomas's death. Archaeological excavations have uncovered thousands of pilgrim badges from the 12th and 13th centuries, proving that Thomas's cult spread across all of Europe. The miracle windows at Canterbury, installed around 1200, depict over 100 different miracles attributed to St. Thomas. Thomas Becket's story is really about the price of standing up for what you believe in. Here was a man who had everything: wealth, power, the friendship of the king, and he threw it all away because he refused to compromise his principles. But it's also about the dangerous mix of friendship and power. Henry and Thomas weren't just king and archbishop. They were best friends who knew each other's secrets, who trusted each other completely. When that friendship turned into political warfare, it became more bitter and personal than any ordinary conflict. Maybe that's why Henry took Thomas's defiance so personally. It wasn't just about church versus state. It was about betrayal. In Henry's mind, Thomas had chosen God over their friendship, and that was unforgivable. In the end, both men lost. Thomas lost his life. Henry lost his best friend and his reputation. The church-state conflict that started their fight continued for centuries. Sometimes standing up for your principles means you pay the ultimate price. But sometimes that sacrifice changes the world. The medieval world was full of impossible choices between loyalty and conscience, friendship and faith. If you want to hear more stories about the people who shaped history by refusing to back down, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell. Because trust me, Thomas Becket was just the beginning.